Hey, this is Pat with RacketStringTips.com. Welcome to the first episode of Stringer Things. Stranger Things. Stringer Things. Yes, Stringer Things. That's a thing. It is a thing. Well, welcome to the first episode of Stringer Things. Well, it's got a good sound to it. This is our first Stringer Q&A. What we're going to do every week, some of the questions that I get asked, and some of the questions that I think that would be beneficial to the beginning stringer, or intermediate stringer, and I will just get right into it. So first off, if you like this information, if you like this content, if it's valuable to you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave me a question so that I can answer it in a follow-up episode. And if you just want to make a comment about something, hey, I would be happy to answer. I do respond to all the questions. So I'm going to have to cut that out. All right, question 1. I think I am losing tension on my string job. What do I need to be looking for? Okay, so there's really two things here. You're either going to have problems at the tie-offs or clamps slipping. So as far as the tie-offs, if you are stringing in a one-piece, standard round the world type pattern, then you're only going to have 2 knots. However, because you are stringing the whole racket with just the 2 knots, you could lose more tension there. I think a lot of stringers feel that when you have a 2-piece string job, and even though you have 4 knots, you have a little bit more control. Some of the things that I usually recommend is adding tension at the last pull before the knot. Usually 10% is a good number. And then what you can do when you tie off, you can measure the string. I'll show some pictures on that in the follow-up. Basically, what I'll do sometimes is I will put a little line, a little a Sharpie on there, so then I can see if there's any slippage on my knots, and so I'll do that from time to time. Also, sometimes when you tie off, if there's too much string on the outside, meaning that you had to go down 2 or 3 holes, and so you have like a really large piece of string on the outside, that sometimes can also create more slippage. Another thing that you might check is the way that you are tying your knots. What type of a knot are you using? How secure is it? So we can get into that sometime as well, because that'll make a difference. As far as your clamp slipping, you really need to be careful when you start the string job, and take care as far as what gauge are you using. Are you using a 17 gauge or an 18 gauge? What type of string is it? Sometimes you're going to need to make small, it sometimes is a feel actually, but sometimes you'll have to make small adjustments to your clamps. And you don't want to be doing it in the middle of a string job, because if once the string slips, you could have damaged that string, and it's going to render the whole piece of string useless. So take that into consideration, that make sure that the clamps are not slipping beforehand. Usually every 5 to 10 string jobs, I'll make sure that the clamps are clean, brush them out a little bit, make sure there's no residue from previous strings. Many times the multi-filaments and some of the residue that kind of comes off, many times with the multi-filaments, that's what I've found. Next question, how can I get faster at stringing? I guess my answer to that would be practice, practice, practice. No, but seriously, when it comes to getting faster at stringing, when you're first starting out, you're not really worried about how fast you're stringing. The whole idea is to get it correct, to learn good technique, and to basically not make mistakes. Many times what I found when I first got started, and when I'm teaching others and they're first getting started, usually when you're weaving the cross strings, that's where people start making mistakes. And there's ways that you can check yourself as you're going, and there's ways that you can eliminate those kind of problems, and I'll show that in the future. But it's really important to get it right. So it might take you an hour, hour and 20 minutes maybe when you're first getting started. And it also depends on what kind of machine you're using. If we're using a basic drop weight floating clamp system, it's going to take you a little bit longer. If you're using a lockout machine with 4 or 6 point mounting system and base clamps, it might not take you as long. If you're using an electronic machine, then it's probably going to even take you a little bit less time. If you're used to your machine, of course, and you've used it for some time, you'll be able to get quicker with no matter what you're using. I mean, some folks use the same machine that they've been stringing with for 20 years, and they're not going to switch. So, and you just get faster. So that comes with practice. Sometimes when you're stringing a racket and you use a two-piece, I've always found that I can string faster, I think, with a two-piece, just because I have a system down, and that's kind of, you know, pre-weaving the mains, stringing 1 or 2 ahead for the crosses. Those are all things that I do that end up saving me a little bit of time in the end, and of course not making any errors while you're stringing. So generally, once you've strung 20, 50, 100 rackets, you should be able to do it. You should be able to string a racket in about 30 minutes or so. If you want to compare that to the pros, professional stringers stringing at a tournament, they're going to be stringing rackets in about 20 minutes, and if they have to string an encore racket, they're going to be able to do it in about 10 minutes. But being fast is not always the best thing, because you could easily burn string as you're pulling them through. You need to be careful of all that. You get sloppy with your knots. You get sloppy with straightening the string. So really, just take time in doing the best job that you can. So if you can string a racket in 30 to 45 minutes, I think you're doing good. All right, next question. What tension should I string my racket at? Well, generally, if you haven't used that racket or you have no idea where to start, I would start in the middle of the recommended tension that the racket has. Usually on the racket, it'll give you a 10-point reference. I would start right in the middle and then take note from that. How did it feel? Next time, if you feel that you need to add a little bit more power, just maybe go a little bit looser on it. If you want to get a little bit more control, just add a few pounds, tighten that up a little bit. So just keep a log of that. But generally, I would just start in the middle if I have no reference point. Next question. What if the tie-off hole has tubing in it? Can I still tie off there? So this is one of these questions that's, my answer would be maybe. How that comes about is when you have tubing in the hole that you are going to be tying off in, it makes it a little bit harder sometimes to get that string through there, and when you are creating your knot, it is hard sometimes to get it to lock in without slipping on the tubing. So if you did your pre-check, your racket pre-check, where you're checking all the holes, making sure everything is okay, and at that point, if you would have noticed that there's tubing in there, or there should be tubing in that hole, then at that point I would create an alternative hole where I could tie off. Generally, that alternative hole will either be the one above it or below it, depending on the racket, and I will create and make that hole a little bit bigger with an awl, and then that way I can later on put a string in there and tie off. Because you need to be careful. Sometimes this does this. You need to be careful. All these pop-ups. Okay, because you need to be careful. You need to be careful about just tying off on a tubing, because you could end up losing your knot. It could be slipping out, and then you lose tension, and then the string job's a waste. So yeah, that's why doing all your pre-checks can eliminate this problem. If you do have to use that hole once if you didn't realize it till the end, then you're just going to have to do the best that you can. But I would not recommend doing that if you're getting any kind of slippage on that. So so that's summing that up. The last question for today. I am new to stringing. How long should it take for me to string a racket? Well, I kind of addressed that in the other question, but I did want to just say, yeah, if you're new, it could take you an hour to string a racket, even longer. because you're just taking care of each individual thing and everything is new. Once you've done it for a while, again, 20, 40, 50 rackets, you're going to start improving, reducing your time. And if you can string a racket in 30 to 45 minutes, then you're doing good. All right, thanks. Have a good day. We'll see you next time. Bye.